This fresh berry and white chocolate sourdough recipe was inspired by the deliciously fresh summer fruits coming into season. This special sourdough can be made with the following fruits. I believe some sourdough making experience under the belt is best before diving into this recipe, which is why I created this video at an intermediate level. And since I made this video for intermediate sourdough bread bakers, I will therefore demonstrate the recipe a bit faster with fewer detailed explanations compared to my beginner recipe videos. But if you are brand new to sourdough bread making, don't shy away from watching. Absolutely come along on the journey and allow it to inspire and motivate you to build up your sourdough bread making skills and understanding. In the meantime, I have a beginner-friendly how to make sourdough bread video that is perfect for all entry-level sourdough makers. So start there if you want to get here. Let's get started with today's recipe. This is a dessert sourdough bread, and unique to this recipe is that we'll be adding fresh fruit and maple syrup rather than dried fruit and/or a dry sugar. Fresh fruit and liquid maple syrup are a game changer to the dough's hydration and timing of the fruit inclusions. I've developed this recipe to compensate for those factors. Therefore, I do not recommend substitutions. No dried or frozen fruit instead of fresh fruit, no dry sugar instead of maple syrup, and no gluten-free flours either. This recipe will be using a standard bread flour. So if you want this bread, follow this recipe. Tare the digital scale and add 220 grams of warm water. Add 70 grams of pure maple syrup. Add 100 grams of the starter. Make sure you feed the starter the night before and it's at least doubled in size by time you're ready to make this recipe. Stir to incorporate. Add 450 grams of bread flour. Lastly, add 10 grams of salt. Combine the ingredients. I always start with a spatula to get it going. Then I switch out to a plastic scraper. Lastly, I use my hand to incorporate the last of the flour into the dough ball. This is the most of my kneading, which is about no more than 2 minutes. I'll stop once the flour is incorporated and the dough holds together. It will be shaggy in appearance, just like this. Leave for 30 minutes to allow the gluten to begin developing. 30 minutes later, I'll lightly dampen my hands with water to prevent them from sticking to the dough. We'll start with a series of slab and folds. The end result is a significantly smooth, improved dough ball. Again, allow the dough to rest for 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, now we'll do some stretch and folds. The dough isn't stretching much more, so I'll stop here. Prep the bulk rise container with a little oil and place the dough inside. I like to use rubber bands as markers so I can see clearly when the dough has doubled in size. Allow it to sit at room temperature until it has doubled in size. Once doubled, prepare the upcoming steps since we want to move quickly through this next part. Oil a large piece of plastic wrap. This will line the proofing basket to catch any possible berry juice leakage. Place it over the proofing basket, then move it out of the way. Let's take a moment to talk about the fruit that will soon be added. Berries are wonderful for this recipe, particularly strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, mulberries, boysenberries, and blueberries. Cherries are also a divine choice. If using strawberries, use a paring knife to cut each berry up into small pieces. If using any of these types of berries, cut the larger ones in half or into thirds. If there happens to be just a few small ones, go ahead and leave those. We want to focus on cutting the large ones down. If using blueberries or raspberries, no need to slice or cut them into a smaller size since they have a different structure to them than the other berries we just discussed. If using cherries, remove the stem and pit, then cut in half or in thirds. Don't prepare the fruit any sooner than right before you turn the dough onto the counter after it's doubled in size from the bulk rise. This is because we don't want the fruit sitting around for long, releasing its juices, which would ultimately make the dough too wet. Also, don't wash the fruit. That extra moisture on the fruit skin, even if it doesn't seem like that much, can tip the hydration scale in the wrong direction. And most importantly, do not use frozen fruit. Frozen fruit releases way too much water and will turn the dough into a mush mess. This recipe has been developed for fresh fruit only. Once the fruit is prepped, turn the dough out onto the counter. Stretch it into a rectangle shape. Pour out the white chocolate chips over the dough. Distribute them throughout. Use your palm and gently press them into the dough. Don't be tempted to skip the white chocolate chips. They're essential to this recipe. Next, add the fruit. And without crushing it, gently distribute it throughout. Now we're going to roll the dough 3 times over. After each roll, cup your hands and gently press to work out any large air gaps. Then repeat. I'm demonstrating with strawberry, but you'll do the exact same method no matter which fruit you're using. Last roll. And now it's a long dough log carrying precious cargo. Next, fold the ends over like so. Pick it up and place it into the proofing basket smooth side down. Adjust the plastic wrap if needed. Place the dough in a large plastic bag. Leave a little breathing hole and pull it up so it's not resting on the dough. Place it in the refrigerator overnight. We'll bake it tomorrow. It's the next day and we're ready to bake. Preheat the oven to 450 degrees with the Dutch oven in the oven, lid on. Once the oven indicates it's up to temp, I like to give it an extra 10 or 15 minutes to make sure the Dutch oven is fully up to temperature. Generously oil a large piece of parchment paper. Pour a little maple syrup in a bowl and have a marinade brush ready. Bring the dough out of the refrigerator. Sometimes a little berry juice escapes and collects on the sides. If this happens, pour it off. Turn the dough out onto the parchment paper. Brush it with maple syrup. Not only will this add a slight sweetness to the crust, it's going to help the bread brown since the Dutch oven lid is going to stay on throughout the entire baking process. Use a lame to make the lengthwise score from one end to the other. Now we're ready to get it in the oven. Remove the Dutch oven from the oven. Quickly transfer the dough in, put the lid back on, and place it in the oven for 40 minutes. It's been 40 minutes, and now it's time to get our first look at the results. Lift it up and out. Give it a few minutes to rest, then remove the parchment paper and place the bread onto a wire rack to cool for no less than 2 hours before slicing. The bread absolutely needs the full 2 hours to set, especially with all those berry juices inside. If you cut in now, you could ruin it. I know how hard it is to resist, but truly, I'm not trying to ruin your fun. I'm trying to give you sound advice so that your fresh berry sourdough is a success. Okay, we've done the time. Let's cut in. Here are some tips. The center section of the bread will be a fruity, white chocolatey, oozy goodness like this. The texture reminds me of the gooey inside of a cinnamon roll. Of course, this not being a cinnamon roll, but the texture is similar. As you cut further out from the center, the texture will be less gooey like this. Warm it up just before eating, and if eating the gooey part, optionally add a whipped topping or some ice cream for an extra decadent experience. But even if you don't add a whipped topping or ice cream, the gooiness is just finger-licking good. You're gonna love it. The less gooey sections are more suitable to be warmed in a toaster for more casual enjoyment. Then add a spread like a butter or coconut oil. Yum-y. I found the raspberry and cherry breads had the most juice release like this. But like I just explained, the center is where it will be the juiciest and the gooeyest. Slice further out, and it's like this. During baking, some fruit juices and maple syrup will find their way to the bottom and caramelize. The caramelization can act a bit like glue on the parchment paper to the bread bottom. That's why it's important to generously oil the parchment paper, and it will still probably need some shimming to release. If you have one of these baking mats for bread loaves, use it in addition to the parchment paper. The parchment paper will catch those juices during baking that come down so that they don't caramelize to the surface of the Dutch oven. And then the baking mat will prevent the parchment paper from adhesions to the bread. It's just a win-win. Makes it really simple. If you make this recipe, let me know which fruit you used and how it turned out. I love hearing from you in the comments section. For my complete sourdough playlist that includes how to make a sourdough starter from scratch and how to make sourdough bread for beginners, click right here. And if fermenting vegetables for gut health interests you, check out this playlist right here. It is full of beginner-friendly recipes to get you on that fermenting train. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.